Software developers use the term cloud native to describe applications that are designed for the cloud, but today it seems more of a term for containerized applications. This episode of the Tech Field Day podcast, recorded ahead of Cloud Field Day 20, includes Guy Currier, Jack Poller, Ziv Levy, and Stephen Foskett, that's me, discussing the true meaning of cloud native. Is it really just a marketing term? Welcome to the Tech Field Day podcast, the only show that dares to be both on topic or on premise, and sometimes even on premises or on location. That's right. This week, we're going to be on premises at Cloud Field Day, and we're recording a special episode kind of previewing what we're going to be speaking about there. Each time we meet, we bring together a group of IT experts to discuss a single idea about a key concept in the industry. And this week, we're talking cloud native, because after all, Cloud Field Day is coming up, and cloud native sure seems to be a bit of a marketing term, so we're going to tackle that. But first, let's meet who's on the panel today.
Hey everybody, my name is Ziv Levy, founder and CEO of Cloud Consulting. I help companies that struggle with getting out of legacy applications, legacy operating systems, everything around their cloud solutions, adopting the cloud. That is still happening to this day. And everything around securing that solution on top of the cloud or on-premise.
Hi, I'm Jack Poller. I am a principal analyst with Paradigm Technica, a cybersecurity industry analyst firm.
I'm Guy Currier. I am a CTO and a tech market advisor at Visible Impact, which is part of the Futurum Group. And I've been working on cloud and tech and app dev for about 25 years.
And I'm Stephen Foskett, organizer of those Tech Field Day events series, which is also part of the Futurum Group. And I've been doing this for about 15 years. And I'm kind of getting tired of hearing how everything is cloud native because, I don't know, some of it doesn't seem all that native. What do you think, Guy? Want to kick us off here?
Yeah, sure. I mean, cloud native started out as really an app dev term, in my view. Cloud had come out as something that could be provided as a service, infrastructure resources that could be provided as a service, software that could be provided as a website and so forth. But when you're thinking about developing applications based on cloud, this would be going back 15 years or so, you had to take account of how cloud resources worked. They were fragile. They were not necessarily persistent. They were not very well suited in a lot of cases to applications that just assumed resources were always available. And so this cloud native term seemed to take account of that. It was a reaction that application developers should have to using this terrific self-service style resource. Fast forward to today, and it seems to be a lot more about how the infrastructure is constructed, specifically containers. So when you hear cloud native, when I hear cloud native now, I just sort of substitute Kubernetes in my mind because I have a feeling that a Kubernetes pitch is coming. And that makes me wonder whether cloud native has the same meaning it has anymore. These days, I slash it. When I write about it, I do cloud native /, and it's usually / microservices / 12-factor. And once we start slashing, then we're starting to lose the original meaning. That's just my take on it.
I'll come at it from a different angle in that I spent a lot of time talking to a lot of cybersecurity companies. And the term is bandied about quite a lot at a very high level. And I would say it really seems in the cybersecurity world to be a way to distinguish applications and smaller vendors who wrote their applications originally for the cloud rather than legacy vendors who started out with an application that may have been a legacy monolithic infrastructure type application that was then either ported to the cloud or runs on premises and a hybrid cloud and in the cloud at the same time. You talk to 10 different vendors and you'll get 10 different definitions of what cloud native really means in sort of my experience.
Well, I mean, it could be an ecosystem. Another word I usually try to avoid. I mean, there are meanings to it that could extend it to sort of be part of every layer of the stack, right? But then I feel like the whole meaning gets flipped. I mean, let's go back to containers. Cloud native means containers. now, right? At least within the infrastructure world. I was at Nutanix.next a couple of weeks ago. Anywhere you saw cloud native, you could just substitute in your mind Kubernetes, because Nutanix is a virtualization vendor, and they're looking to they are entering into container management. But then, to me, okay, like containers right now are really more suited to stateless apps, but there's nothing inherent about containerization that means it's not good for stateful. And so now, if with a container, you are providing the environment for application X to run according to its own needs, then cloud native becomes meaningless.
Well, it's not that cloud native is meaningless so much as it is that the things that people are describing as cloud native are not actually cloud native, right? I mean, as you say, many people are containerizing applications but not actually making them into any kind of scalable microservices type, modern application framework. All they're doing is they're running a monolithic application in a container using Kubernetes to schedule that and calling it cloud native. And that's just really not the right term for that. I mean, that's good. I will be the first to say that running applications in containers is freaking brilliant, but it doesn't make them cloud native, right?
Yeah, I agree. I think that there's a major difference between trying to run your solution just as you described, and then try to actually build it from different components, different services, use all across the board on the different platforms, and leverage those different services. That would be cloud native to me. That's how I see it. So I agree with you.
I think one of the other challenges is the perspective of the audience. If you are a developer or working in app dev or working in the guts and the technology, then knowing something is cloud native and what that means in terms of that it's running in Kubernetes and microservices is or can be very important to you. On the other hand, if you are looking at acquiring software as a service, as long as the service provider provides you scalable services, do you really care what's underneath and that it's running cloud native or Kubernetes or their own technology underneath? Does it really matter?
Actually, I think the service provider example is a perfect example, Jack, because maybe you do care. Why would you care? Because if the provider is not one you already know intimately, and let's assume you don't because you're evaluating them, they're going to tell you theirs is a resilient, scalable, globally available service, or whatever. Maybe they'll be more limited, say, available in North America and Europe, whatever it might be. Great. And one of their proof points is going to be it's cloud native. And if you don't know what they mean by that, then it's not a proof point anymore. So, I feel like discussions like this are as much about clarity in the market as they are about features and products and technologies that are available. And that's my whole problem with it is you say cloud native to platform engineers, they're thinking one thing. You say it to application managers, they're thinking another thing. At least that's how it seems to me right now.
Well, I think, some of the things that Guy said resonated with me, that it is Kubernetes microservices based, scalable. And I think probably most importantly is that the term native to me means that it's actually built for and running in and taking advantage of all of the technological features of Kubernetes microservices environments, right? So it's not, as you said, Stephen, it's not just we've taken a monolithic architecture application and dropped it inside a virtualization environment that just happens to be Kubernetes versus VMware or any other virtualization environment. It's actually built to use the features of the and the technology that's involved.
So an application that has, for example, that can spawn multiple different processes as demand increases, each of those being scheduled by Kubernetes and run as a containerized service on whatever platform Kubernetes decides. something that can grow and shrink as demand changes. What about things like the APIs and so on? Are there essential elements of the interface between applications or application components that need to be considered in order for it to be considered cloud native?
I don't think so, Stephen. I think that I'm a huge proponent of, the so-called API economy, right? API management and development management and use is essential to these kind of distributed, disconnected, actually mix of stateless and stateful, et cetera, types of applications, services oriented, continuously delivered, and so on. They're just an essential tool now. But I don't think conceptually there's anything about the API that's needed to make something cloud native. I think, or maybe I'm just really being old school and just thinking like, you just do not know if it's cloud, really what the behavior of the hosting environment is going to be, and you develop accordingly. And containerization and container management and orchestration is a beautiful tool for allowing for the kinds of infrastructure support that the application needs. But once the application starts counting on certain service levels from the infrastructure, it may be cloud native, but it's irrelevant whether it is or not. And the connection points that different microservices have between each other, they don't have to be API based. In fact, I can't think of any, but there could be really important performance or security reasons not to use APIs, and I wouldn't want to exclude those from a cloud native paradigm.
Yeah, I'm in agreement. I think that it makes perfect sense. I don't really see a difference between, why would you call something cloud native or not, based on API availability. I mean, obviously it should be there in a proper form, of course, and allow developers to interact, with the different services while they're building or sending out the commands. So I don't think it's really relevant to that particular term.
But when you say that it doesn't necessarily have to have an API, or there might be use cases where we don't use an API, I think that's correct. But I think one of the hallmarks of the environments and being cloud native is that APIs are the standard way you interact with the system, right? So rather than having a command line interface and a separate web interface and a separate this interface, and everything is done through an API. So you have the application builds its own APIs, and then the interface to that can be accessed programmatically through the APIs. And then if a user needs to access it, you have a front end written that will eventually call those APIs. And it's a different way of interacting with the system so that you can include automation and scalability in it without having to write custom things for every time you change the environment.
Yeah, good. True, but I'm just saying it's not definitional. I mean, I'll give you an example of something I think probably is definitional, which is telemetry and observability. I can't see a way to build a proper cloud native application without telemetry and an observation platform. I just can't see a way to do it, because that would remove insight from the operators into how, as well as within the code, as to how the application is behaving. And that's fundamental to running something cloud natively. Whereas I realize it's only theory, not practice, at least not at this point, but theoretically you could create a cloud native app that doesn't use APIs at all.
I guess it depends on how you're going to define it. I mean, I would say that to me, I would think that any kind of cloud native app ought to have an API interface, and specifically ought to have, a REST interface, because it just seems to me that that is one of the standard things that people expect. But I will concede to Guy that I could imagine an application that doesn't use that. For example, back-end databases probably don't use REST as the interface. Is that an API? Not particularly, but I would say that SQL is still acceptable in a cloud native application. So I will concede that I can see a situation where an app might not have API, might not be completely API driven, but at the same time, I'm not sure if I agree with you about having telemetry and observability. What if the microservices are just that small and ephemeral that you just don't care? Do you need telemetry from everything, or is that just another nice to have like an API?
Yeah, I think it's a must. I have a lot of experience with flying blind, and I can tell you that once you're able to make that shift, you really don't want to go back. The amount of the information, insights, just be able to see that everything is running smoothly, how it works at scale, things you need to improve, and just make sure that overall you're healthy, is definitely something that you must have when you're building an app. If it ties into cloud native, sure, all right, I'll check that box, but I think it's essential either way.
So what other elements do you think are essential for cloud native applications, or maybe not essential, but are likely to be found in them? We talked about microservices based and containerization. We talked about APIs. We talked about observability and telemetry. What else?
Well, key components that you can definitely leverage in for cloud native solutions would be everything around security. So the different aspects of what happens, above the code, the different services that you can leverage, uh, different components that can interact with each other that would help you get a much more secure stack and proper controls in place, both for incoming traffic, outgoing traffic, would be something that would also be essential in my eyes.
That's absolutely right. I think implied in that, lead and stated, is a certain amount of networking networking service management. Not, I mean, any of these things. One of the neat things about cloud native is you can use southbound integration to affect, like you say, Stephen, to influence the infrastructure and how it behaves, in production. And a key element to that I think is often overlooked is networking, throttling up, throttling down, controlling ingress and egress to the different other services. So I'd include that as well. Storage management is frequently coded for, but I think networking tends to be the Cinderella of the whole architecture, looked askance at by most elements of it, and yet critical to the user experience.
So I'm not sure I get that, as from looking at it from the outside in. Everything that you're talking about in terms of the networking is not, to me, a feature of being cloud native. It's a feature of network controls and security controls in that sense. And when you say I'm cloud native or I'm not cloud native, I don't feel that if you say I'm not cloud native that I'm losing anything on the networking side or on the security side.
Yeah, Jack, inherent to the user experience is responsiveness and availability. And if you have ever been in a tunnel trying to use an app on your phone, you can see that very frequently a poor or no connectivity, is not really built into the portion of the app on the phone, the client portion. And if it were network aware, I wouldn't say network aware, I would just say more network tolerant, then you'd have a better user experience.
I don't argue that. I'm just trying to feel out if that is a fundamental characteristic of cloud native versus good app development and good user experience development. I see that if somebody tells me their app is cloud native or their development environment and their stack is cloud native, I don't immediately go to, okay, I'm going to have a great network experience, right? I'm never going to have dropouts, because we all know that's not the case. We had plenty of dropouts and plenty of network issues with apps, regardless of whether they're cloud native or not. I do, on the other hand, think that when I say an app or an environment is cloud native, that I will have a much better experience from a user perspective on things like scalability because of the inherent nature of Kubernetes and cloud native tools and the environment to scale up and scale down automatically without the administrators having to get involved, right? And so I have a better user experience in terms of a load, but I don't necessarily see that on the networking side. So I'm just trying to dig in and say, is that really a fundamental characteristic of cloud native?
Yeah, I think you're yinning my yang, Jack, because when we're talking cloud, one of the many cloud resources that you can't rely on is connectivity between the microservices. And the key part of that connectivity is networking and security.
Yeah, if I wanted to be cynical, which I do, I would say you cannot say that networking or security or storage, advanced configuration of any of these services defines cloud native or are required for cloud native, because most developers do a horrible job and don't know a darn thing about networking or security or storage. And so many cloud native apps do a poor job there. You just can't have that. It can't be definitional, because if it is, then we would have to disqualify so many applications and other elements of the stack too. I mean, performance. I would say that those are all really critical for a successful cloud native application, but I just can't see that that has to be definitional, because if so, then people are just doing a poor job of it. In fact, I would say that most cloud native applications probably have big holes in their networking and security and storage infrastructure.
So I would like to challenge that just a bit. I think that what I'm seeing, over the years is that, different platforms are trying to get, the different customers into, I would say, a good default setting or a good place to start when they're building their apps. So yes, far from perfect, but let's say if you have no idea what you're doing and you're just writing your code and expect it to run, I think you're off to a better start when it's being delivered on top of those platforms versus not going with something that would be, qualify for that cloud native app being served from someplace else. There's just far more things that can go wrong versus what you can get out of the box on top of those different platforms.
Well, I'm going to sort of think about it and go back to sort of the original high level question is cloud native really a marketing term? And I think it's a little bit dependent on usage and audience again. And I'll go back to what I said about audience, is that a lot of marketers love to use adjectives in wherever they go to. And, in all the marketing content and the discussions they have in person. And one of the big adjectives I always hear is cloud native. And I'll get back to, again, what I said earlier, Guy, which is sort of, why do I care? From a technology perspective and a technologist, I love it. And I think it's great and it's modern and it's what we should be doing, because it's solving a whole bunch of problems that monolithic architectures and other architectures have. From a consumer purchasing or an enterprise level person looking at choosing between 3 or 4 different solutions to a problem, whether it's cybersecurity or storage or an a CRM application or a marketing application. When I think about those as a consumer of the application and a purchaser of the application, I hear the cloud native word and it just sort of disappears. It's in the noise, along with fastest and greatest and best and first and award winning and all the other adjectives that we as marketers like to throw in there, because it doesn't have a consistent definition. And as this conversation here, we've been in this world for 15 plus years. All of us, we've been using this stuff for 15 plus years. And we still spent 10 minutes trying to figure out and come up with a definition for it, right? And so sometimes it really does bother me that the marketing people throw it in, because it's not, I can't put my thumb on it and say, this is exactly what it is.
Yeah, but I feel like we're back to the beginning, except I feel better about it. It is a marketing term. It's mostly a marketing term, but I actually kind of feel like that's a good thing. A story is not in a word. So my product story is not, this is a cloud native product. There's more to it than that. Let's just make sure we're explaining that, I guess.
To channel my inner Justin Warren, I have to say, words have meanings. And if we're using them wrong, that's a problem. And so I would say that if people are describing their application as cloud native, we should be ready at least to ask, is it true that this meets the definitions that, I have, that you have, that other people would have for that term? And more importantly, does it meet the goals that that term has? I mean, so often what we've been talking about here during this discussion are the physical consistency of an application. But what we're really asking is, does it achieve what we need it to achieve in terms of scalability and performance and stability and predictability and all these actually useful outcomes? The benefit of cloud native is building applications that are bigger and better than anything we could build that would be monolithic. If an application is meeting that, is delivering that, then I guess who cares whether it was built in a cloud native structure or not? We were hearing Guy at Click Connect last week that many early applications were built not on a recognizably cloud native structure, but were built in a very monolithic way with a monolithic database behind them. But it was a really big, strong monolithic database that was able to scale. I think Denny was telling us about MySpace, for example, that used a Microsoft SQL Server backend. That's certainly not a cloud native app, but it certainly did scale. So I guess ultimately, if somebody's going to make a promise about cloud native, then they better be ready to back that up in practice, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm looking forward, starting tomorrow, to see. I mean, I feel like we've almost established a template or a reference point, because I expect us to hear that word cloud native a few times, maybe starting tomorrow from Juniper or from Google this week at the Cloud Field Day. And now I feel a little bit better oriented, because what I'm trying to do, like you say, with cloud native, is create this resilient, globally available, scalable, et cetera, application. And so now if you as a vendor are saying to me, this is for cloud native, that's a reference point against which I can judge what you're doing.
I'd say the big caveat that I have to all of that, and what I will be listening for, is vendors throwing the term out there and labeling their product as cloud native to give people the impression that cloud native is a silver bullet that's going to solve all their problems, right? And I don't believe that. I believe in doing Kubernetes and cloud native stuff, but it is not a silver bullet. And just the fact that you're doing cloud native doesn't mean you're going to solve somebody's problem.
I'll suggest a different approach. I think that what should be the angle would be possibilities. You have the flexibility to do a lot. It's really up to you to figure out whether you want to leverage that or not. Let's try to settle for that.
Ziv, you're so nice. Like, Jack and I, we're like the marketers here. We're the ones who are supposed to be like all optimistic and stuff. And it turns out that we're the cynics.
Well, I guess all of us are a little bit. Anytime we start a conversation on the premise that something is just a marketing term, I think there's a little bit of cynicism, or maybe a lot of cynicism built into that. But ultimately, I think you guys are onto something here, that in order for something to be truly cloud native, it really depends on what you're getting out of it and not what you put into it. And I can imagine someone building a microservices API-driven app with telemetry and networking integration that stinks. And I could imagine someone building a monolithic app that is wonderfully scalable and doesn't. And so ultimately, I think that we need to make sure that we're getting what we want. So thank you so much. This has been a really cool conversation. We'll have more of this at Cloud Field Day this week. I'm really glad to have you all joining us along with the other 9 delegates that are going to be out there with us. We're going to hear from some incredible companies. We've got Google Cloud for an entire day. I'm sure they have a thing or two to say on this subject. We've got Juniper Networks, which goes directly to some of the conversation we've had here about networking and security. We've got Morpheus Data and Oxide Computer, who absolutely know a lot about building scalable platforms. And I think it's incredible to think that we'll be able to continue this conversation this week. Before we go, let's go through and tell us a little bit more. Where can we continue this conversation? Where can we connect with you? And where will you be covering Cloud Field Day? Guy?
You'll see me mostly in LinkedIn. I do publish at Futurum's website, and you might see a piece or two there in the coming weeks, but check me and follow me in LinkedIn.
Like Guy, I do most of my work on LinkedIn, so please follow me and find out more about all the companies we'll be talking to next week.
Same here. You can find me on LinkedIn with all my relevant content.
And as for me, you'll find me here on the Tech Field Day podcast, along with our weekly news rundown every Wednesday, and our Utilizing Tech podcast season, which is back now with a season focused on AI data infrastructure. We just kicked that off, so that's our Monday podcast. Thanks so much for listening. This is the Tech Field Day podcast. We really do enjoy bringing these discussions to you. We enjoy throwing our fantastic Tech Field Day events and spending time with these incredible people in person at those events and sharing that with the world. If you enjoyed this discussion, please do subscribe to the YouTube channel. Also, maybe subscribe in your favorite podcast application for an audio version of the podcast, and give us a rating and a review. That really helps. This podcast is brought to you by Tech Field Day, home of IT experts from across the enterprise, part of the Futurum Group. For upcoming events and more episodes, head over to techfieldday.com/podcast. Thanks for listening, and we will catch you next week.